Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the HR Tech Bench. Today, we are going to be delving into the expansive world of AI and machine learning with our guest, Dr. Darren Keegan. Darren, welcome. Darren is a individual who is working with organizations to develop deeper awareness of the neurological foundations of decision making and its behavioral implications. And he has a particular focus on the use of intuition. Darren, thanks for being here. Might just ask you to just talk to us a little bit about what experience you've got in, I guess, this sort of space and what your background is.
Yeah, happy to do that. So first, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So my background's really education, executive education. So I've been in that space for well over a decade, and really involved in particular in using and building business simulations. I lead a simulation technology platform company, and so we're at the kind of the coal face, if you like, of working with organizations who are thinking about strategy or thinking about innovation, and areas like artificial intelligence obviously come into that. How do we use that? And so that I've really kind of spent the past, over a decade in really working with organizations doing that kind of work. So my particular interest in areas that I really enjoy from a research perspective are strategic decision making, as you mentioned, in areas like cognitive bias, which I'm sure many of your listeners would be familiar with. And so really that's how kind of moved into that space. We use AI ourselves in our own development, our own design. So really ever since the first launch of the first large language models in ChatGPT, been very interested in this space, and I've started to really think about it and its wider implications for organizational learning. And I think that's the areas we'll probably most touch on today, right? How do companies think about the impact of AI and what it's going to be, and what is some of the latest research in that area telling us? So I'm sure there's a few areas in there worth covering.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I guess, one of the key things that I'm really keen for us to be able to achieve through this particular episode as well is just to ensure that individuals have a bit more of a general knowledge of the AI space before we then start, deeply delving into the sort of key implications for it within the HR space. And part of the reason for this episode is just to give listeners that opportunity to really just understand the wider components and implications. In your experience so far, can you maybe just talk to us about how you're seeing AI sort of, I guess, shaping business operations and some of that consumer interaction across the board?
Yeah, and so what I would say from the outset, I'm really leaning in two different areas, and I think for this is hopefully going to fit well with what your goals are for for this particular episode, because I'm not down at the level of programming. I'm not a programmer, and I have people within. We've got developers inside our company who are much better placed to talk to the technical aspects. So it won't be a super technical discussion from me because it's just not my area of expertise. What I'm much more interested in is kind of pulling out, right, thinking about it strategically, which is kind of what you're alluding to there. And in terms of what we're seeing, there's a couple of different things that are happening. We're starting to see the early signs of research in the area from companies that have begun to adopt it. And really, I want to focus in on one particular research study because I think that's going to be the most useful place to begin. MIT, in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group, carried out a piece of research which was really looking at, okay, how are companies using AI? What are the kind of impacts they're having? And with a very kind of business focus, right? So is anyone actually making any money out of it? Are they able to turn it into business models? Are they able to use it in such a way that it's having a financial impact on the company? And I'll just give you the kind of headline stat from it. The headline stat is, in their view, only 10% of the organizations were seeing any return on investment. Right now, if you think about the literally hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent currently on trying to embed and implement artificial intelligence, and you think that 90% of that is wasted cash currently, in one sense, right? The companies have not found a way to turn that into anything that's revenue generating or just any kind of return on that investment. That's a pretty stark finding. And the other piece, what was particularly good about this research is they first made the point that, okay, so the headline figure, only 10% are seeing a return investment. The real question for them is, well, what are they doing, right? What is separating that group of 10%? What are they doing that others are not? And the headline from that piece is that they have completely redesigned their workflows in such a way as to truly embed AI. And I'm going to share with you at some point in the conversation a framework that they suggest is one to use and to think about it. And there's really kind of 5 different levels of how you might think about the kind of human AI integration. And so I think if you take that first as the premise and say only 10% of companies are actually doing this well, I have a point of view that the companies, even those companies that are perhaps not seeing a return on investment, what they're certainly getting is an experience where they're learning, right? So they are learning. We're trying to embed AI. Where does it work? Where does it not work? And just what is the general sense of it, and how are people reacting to it? So I don't believe that it's entirely wasted money or anything like that. But certainly, what you perhaps are seeing is there's a concern, I would say, at an executive level. Companies will eventually get to a point and say, we're spending a lot of money, we're seeing no return. It's creating some drama inside our organizations. People are concerned about it. They're concerned about its use. And so you might see that funding start to dry up. So you'll see fewer initiatives, and companies might invest in fewer initiatives because they're concerned they're not going to see a return on investment. And I think what you might see is a little bit of a shift to companies saying, we're going to wait and see our competitors and others in this space. So let's see who does it well. Let's see who finds a way to use AI in a way that actually has an impact on our customers, either that's internal customers or external customers, those that are actually seeing some kind of advantage and have proven that advantage. And we'll be fast followers. We'll get there after them, right? And it's already someone else has done the hard work and poured the money into finding that out. Now, that's speculation at this point, because just the final point I want to make here is that we don't know very lot. And the reason that we don't know much is because companies are spending so much money, they don't want to release insights into the business. Researchers are not likely to be getting much access to be able to go in and say, well, what are you doing and how are you doing it? So that's why this BCG MIT research is really such a kind of such an important study, because there's very few like it currently.
That's all fascinating, and I'm really keen to hear more. But I'd want to take us just half a step backwards, because that's my role here sometimes, is to ask stupid questions and back up. Feel like everybody knows about AI, but we don't always know what we're talking about when we mention AI. We know ChatGPT and the large language models and some of those, the assistant and that Microsoft uses now. But when we're talking about this AI investment, can you give us a definition to sort of set the context for this discussion? What do we mean by AI specifically? What characterizes something as AI versus a different type of technology or something else we might invest in?
So it's a great question. I'm probably pushing up the limits of my expertise in answering it well, and so apologies to anyone who's an expert in this space and listening to this. I think when we're talking about artificial intelligence in this respect, I've got one answer for you and a second answer. The second answer is going to explore more about what do we really mean by intelligence in this space, because I don't think it's well defined. In terms of artificial intelligence and its use just now, within the title here we have AI and machine learning, and that's maybe the kind of where a distinction can start to be drawn. So, using something like machine learning, which is really a process of recursive learning that allows machines to learn themselves by using their own data and using and basically going through a kind of recursive process through different data sets in order to improve their own capabilities and really learn from themselves is how it is. And I think that the primary example of this might be something like AlphaGo. We've got with this very complex game, and Google are able to build a system that understands the game Go, and it's then able to beat humans, which was something that wasn't expected. And it did it by basically being able to make a move that humans had never really thought of. And it's a great example of how if you just the machine was able to play just literally millions of repetitions of playing the game, and it learned from itself, and it learned what the right kind of strategies could be in order to be successful. And so we can think of, think about translating that across to some kind of business operation or function. Is it possible to take the processes that are used in order for us to carry out some kind of a workflow? And if we had the machine learn from the data from, let's say we had a data set that went back, 20, 30 years, and we were able to feed that through, would it be able to kind of recursively go through that and find patterns in it, find different ways of carrying out the operation in a way that it couldn't before? And then we would end up with something that would be that a human couldn't possibly do, right? It just wouldn't, too many humans, too long to actually do that. And so that's really the kind of machine learning component. And that's distinct in many ways from really what the kind of headline act is just now, which is all the large language models. And so whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Claude, whether that's Grok, whether that's Perplexity, they're all fundamentally doing the same thing. We should say, by the way, that the open source models are, even though they're slightly behind, are actually really impressive, and so they're free models that people can get access to and to train. And what the big breakthrough for those is that machine learning and actually the tools that were used to create the large language models, they've been around for decades, right? So they've had the math for decades. What they didn't have is the data. And so the big breakthrough was we have the internet, and now you can train we can basically take all of the information that's available on the internet, and we can train the models on it. And this is where they get their and so we have this kind of this human interface, this chat, and that was really the big breakthrough. There's a kind of interesting kind of aspect to this. I don't know if you want me to just give you one more piece. So one of the things that's fascinating about it is, machine software is typically rules based, right? And so typically it's just a set of rules that you're giving the machine in order to carry out whatever activity you're asking it to do, right? So that's what software is. And so logic based, rules based languages is, and so the people that were working in this and trying to create a kind of human level AI, for decades, what people were trying to do is say, well, we need to teach it the rules of grammar. We need to teach it the rules of how to construct language. So you kind of do it from a bottom-up approach, right? And the big breakthrough came from, but that just wasn't working. It was too complex, right? Fundamentally too difficult to do. And nobody was able to crack that and get anything useful. And then what happened is somebody had the bright idea of saying, well, what if we were to train it in a completely different way and effectively let the machine try and work it out for itself? And so really what you have, all of the large language models, all that's happening is that the model is predicting what the next word in a sentence should be. That's all it's doing. And it's able to do that because it's able to map from all of the learning it's done from absorbing all of this language across the entire internet. It's able to say, in this particular sentence with this particular context, it's highly likely the next word should really be this word, or it should be this word. And it's really the closeness of those words to each other that ends up being the thing that gives you. So when you actually think about it like this, the machine has no idea what sentence it's constructing. It doesn't really have the meaning or the semantics of it. It just knows the next word that should probably be in a sentence. And when you look at how good it is, when you look at how human it sounds, it's quite extraordinary to think about that's what's going on.
Yeah, so that, I mean, it's almost like it creates an illusion of understanding, but what it is just a statistical model that says this is likely to work in this situation. Same with the Go solutions. Here's a move nobody's ever thought of before. It doesn't know why it works, but it knows that it will work because it's run enough models to say, oh, in this situation, it'll actually go ahead.
Which is totally fascinating because when you do have, any output that comes out from any of the large language models like a chat GPT, it absolutely does feel like you are in fact speaking to another human, right? So its capability is quite tremendous. I guess given that, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about what you see being some of the revolutionary things that are maybe coming through in this space? And maybe some of the kind of groundbreaking developments that are coming through in AI?
It's a tough question to answer. I will say that. And part of it is we've reached a point of escape velocity on the development of the models and what they're capable of, right? So if one model will launch deep research that you're able to put in a query and it might take 10 to 20 minutes and then it will produce a 10,000 word or in some cases, massive documents. You could actually get it to produce a thesis on a particular topic that could be at a kind of PhD level. And they're getting so close to that point, and now all of the models have it within a short space of time, right? So they're all progressing at a level now that if you were to try and keep up with the developments that are taking place across all of the models at all time, it's now reached a point where that's not possible, right? No single individual is really tracking this now. And the reason no one's able to track it is because the amount of investment that's being made both in the compute power, so the amount of computation power that's going through, the energy that's being directed in towards it, has really led to a point where it's almost impossible to track.
Yeah.
I think where it starts to get interesting, say, and maybe this is a place to say, in terms of what's revolutionary, I think what's really becoming the real revolution is going to be in the places where what are the tasks that AI can carry out that are clearly able to do at levels that are better than humans, right? And so the biggest area there is code, right? And so it's very good with languages, with software languages. And I heard so um, without revealing so one of the companies I've worked with, one of the largest technology companies in the world, and I heard internally from one of those individuals one of the last times I was in the United States, um, they had said that within a space of 6 months they were taking the top code that their top developers at one of the top companies in the world, and they would say that 20% of the time the AI was capable of writing better code than those individuals. 20% of the time. 6 months later, it was 80%.
Wow.
So within 6 months, they were already at a point where they were saying, on average, the AI will produce better code than our best people. Nearly 80% of the time. So you're at a level now where it's going to, and it's now, we're very close to this now where using natural language. So instead of, you don't have to know programming language. And so for individuals like us, whereas previously might have said, I've got a great idea for an application, I need to find somebody who can build an app for me. We're at a point where the tools will be available where you have an idea of an app and you use natural language and say, I want an app that's going to help me with my performance reviews and I need it to be able to do it in this particular way. I want it to be able to access this data and I need it to be put in this format for me. And you'll just go in and you'll tell it and it'll create the app. It'll just build it and it'll do the code from the ground up and it'll be largely bug free. So you're at a stage where anything you can think of having an application for, you will be able to tell the machine will build it. And that is, I think, going to be truly revolutionary because if you think about going from a general mental model that was, we need one app that's going to be able to do everything. No, now you're going to have apps that are personalized to you, just for you. Nobody else will ever use it. Doesn't matter whether anybody else ever actually uses this particular application. You're going to use it because it's for your own purposes and your own use. And that's going to be a complete shift.
I think like with many things as well, thinking about what that means, not just for the ability to build any app, but because there's no labor, because there's no cost in actually doing that, you can try just about anything. You can go, oh, oh no, that didn't work. Let's try this. It becomes disposable almost. You can just try anything you want to do, and that can often be a huge spark for innovation as well. As you have very few barriers.
So I agree, but I'm going to throw in a cautionary note.
Please.
My cautionary note here is the natural place that takes us is in an innovation process, and I think about new products or new services or new things that I could offer to a client, a natural way to think, say, well, I've got 1,000 ideas of things that would be amazing, but everybody else is going to be doing the same. And so how do you have a process that manages innovation to ensure that what actually gets out in front of a client or what actually goes out internally in an organization, something that's supposed to improve matters, how do we ensure that you don't just flood the space with a whole new set of processes, new tech, new applications that may in of themselves have some inherent and internal value, and they probably came from a good place. But if it's flooding the sphere of what everyone's having to deal with and cope with on a day-to-day basis, how do we manage that? Because we're probably already at a point where people feel pretty saturated in terms of their digital lives. And so a concern for me would be, what are the controls on that? Right? How do you as an organization think about that and take that seriously?
Flowing on from that, I guess there is also, how businesses deal with the challenge of how to use AI, right? So, not just from an app development perspective, but just overall, how to actually make use of that. What's your take on some of the challenges that maybe some businesses will face, might face, are facing in the adoption of AI across the board?
So the one that I hear most, I was speaking to an organization just 2 weeks ago, a large organization in the resources sector, and one of the things that you'll hear is people saying that there's tremendous concern because people have this view that the AI is going to replace them, right? And because that's all they've been told, right? They've seen the headline figures, and this is going to replace 30-40% of the workforce. I think that's mistaken. I think it's misguided. And I think that if we move in the right way, take the right steps, you can ensure that doesn't happen. In fact, what you end up with is people doing more productive work. But I think the biggest concern is people imagine it's just going to replace me. Now, there are some roles and some positions where I think people should have a genuine concern, right? Because for all of the things AI is able to do, it's more accurate. This is probably a good time to introduce the aspect of the research from MIT and BCG where they produced a framework, because I think this kind of steps us through the different ways to think about how you actually implement it. Probably the most pragmatic advice that I've seen and that I can help share. And so you have to think about what is the relationship between the machine and the human, right? And what I'd like to do is implement is to kind of guide us through this aspect. And then what I'd like to do is just give you a bit of a sense of what we might be missing in this picture, if I could do that. But the first level is to say, you could use an AI in such a way that you say, the first level is the AI is going to decide and implement. I'm going to give it both the ability to be able to decide what it is that needs to be done from a range of options that it's going to generate. And it's then going to implement the decision itself. Now, if you could think of things that are just highly automated, right? So, something that just has to be done on a day-to-day basis that a human doesn't really need to oversee, right? And in fact, it just takes time away from people. So anything that is low level enough that you could say, this is just this is just an operational thing that has to happen. So here it's completely, fully automated. There's no human in the loop would be the way to think about that.
Can we maybe think of a HR tech specific example of that? It's something like running a payroll, right? Which is very rules based. There is a right answer, but it's very complicated. We could hand that over to IT to an AI to be able to figure out, these are the rules, this is how I implement, these are the decisions that I make.
Under these conditions, something that's salary, anyone that's salaried, this all goes out. Nobody has to look at it. It's all done. So I think that's a good example. The second level up from that is the AI decides, but the human's going to implement, right? So the AI is going to come up with a decision, and it's just going to ask, a yes or no. Do we do this or do we not do this, right? And so there's a lot of companies and a lot of organizations will be able to look at workflows and say, yeah, look, that just needs somebody to sign off on it, right? But I don't need the AI to generate lots of different examples or lots of different options for me. I don't want to see the options. I just want it to tell me, do I do this or do I not do this? And then I go ahead and implement it. So you're now thinking of your workflows at two different levels. The third level that comes up from that is that the AI is going to recommend. So here, I now it's not going to be so clear to the AI which of these is the best option, but I wanted to give me a recommendation. So it might give me, here's the top 5 things you could do. I'm going to recommend you go with option A, right? So now you've got a human level. The human understands that there's more to this. There's something for them to consider. Let me give an example. So right now in clinical decisions, like radiologists, for example, radiologists might have, here it's been scanned by the AI. The AI is going to say to me, I think this is a diagnosis. This is my best recommendation. Here's the accuracy I have. What do you think, doctor? And the doctor's got to use their expertise that they've generated over years and years to decide whether they agree with the AI or not. So now we're into, you can see that as you start to ladder up in the significance of decisions that would fall into these categories, we're far away from the world of full automation, but now we're into a place of what would our workflow look like if the AI was involved, right?
So is the factor there the significance of the decision or the complexity of the decision? So are we looking at it saying, I don't trust AI to make this decision because I don't think it has the wealth of experience or or this decision requires understanding, not just statistical knowledge? Or is it, I just feel better if there's a human in the loop here?
I think all of those.
Mm.
I think you've done a great job of kind of identifying what our natural intuition would tell us, right? Our intuition will tell us that there are certain decisions that we want a human who has expertise and has been in the domain for some time. And there's likely a consequence to this that's going to be important. I mean, you could be automating kind of upgrades to a system, right? Software updates that would have consequences if it went wrong, but they're not irreversible. So I think you're now into a world of what are things that might not be easily reversible, or where are places we just feel more comfortable. You raise another one that I want to touch on, and really you're talking about semantics, you're talking about meaning. Does the machine able to understand context? And here's the thing, it doesn't. And so I'm going to come back to that point. The fourth up in this framework is that the AI is going to generate insights, and the human is going to take those insights and think about how they might use those insights. So now we're into a world of, can we use, one of the things, by the way, that machine learning is great for is you can do things like cluster analysis. So a machine can take, data sets. Now, imagine, for example, you're a resource company and you've got 30 years of scans, geological scans, resources, and humans have gone through that data and haven't been able to find anything. Well, what if we put it through a machine? Is the machine able to see patterns that we aren't? Is it able to pull things together and cluster them? I think about this in areas like an HR space and saying, if an AI was across teams and the performance of teams in an organization, a cluster analysis might reveal things and say, interestingly, these particular teams that are in a high performing category have this particular aspect. Now, maybe it's the composition of the team, maybe it's something geographical, maybe it's something to do, it could be anything, but it will find a pattern that a human isn't going to see. It finds that pattern, it reports it out to you, and you then think, I wonder whether we could then implement that more broadly across the organization. But crucially, it's only possible because of the machine, and it's only possible because it's able to parse the data in the way that it can. I would say there that you instantly run into this issue of how good's your data, right? And where did the data come from? So that's really the one component there. But so if you think of this now, the AI is going to generate insights, and I'm going to then think about how we use that information, whether we do or whether we don't, and how we might manage it. The fifth one's a really non-intuitive one, but it's actually, I think, where we'll see some incredible use, and that is that humans generate new material, likely new documents, new proposals, new project ideas, new potential decisions it can take, and then you put it into the AI and you ask it to evaluate. So the AI is used as the interlocutor, you get into a dialogue with the system in order to then say, how do we sharpen these ideas? What does it think of it? Now, the danger there is it's got all historical data, so it's not forward-looking. It can't predict the future, but it's going to do a very good job of being able to say, based on everything that we know just now, based on what forecasts are telling us, I would say that, here's how good your idea is, right? So imagine what innovation processes would look like with an AI involved in that loop. What you're hoping for is it develops, it's able to learn from the organization itself and the way the organization is approaching it. It might be able to know your markets quite well, know your customers, know your clients, know your approaches, and it might have a very good ability to evaluate just the how well it imagines your projects or innovations would go. And so now you've got this really kind of interesting dynamic that's going on. So you now get 5 levels, all the way from the AI just being fully automated, all the way to it really being the place that you take to evaluate your own ideas that are human generated. So we often talk about human in the loop, and I think that's entirely wrong. I think that what this framework tells us is that AI is in the loop. Every one of these is a human generated workflow, right? Designed by humans for humans. And that's what an organization is. And so where you really are asking yourself is, how am I redesigning my workflows so that we have to think about which one of these levels of AI use are we using? And it might be that there are some that you say AI just isn't appropriate at all. But for those that you think AI is appropriate, the next natural question is, well, at what level? Right? And if we're going to redesign our workflow to incorporate, so let's say it's going to be we want the AI to be given as recommendations. If you think of it there and we say, we think that's the appropriate level for this, okay, so how does that work? Right? What does our workflow look like with AI recommendations? How does it do it? I mean, right now, all of you using email, whether you're using Gmail or Microsoft, it's already doing that. Here's what a response would look like, right? And what you'll probably find is that it's decent, but it's not particularly well contextualized because it doesn't know you and it doesn't know that the relationship you have with the individual that you're responding to. But it's getting into that world, right? And that can obviously be much larger. So I think when we talk about those 10% of companies that are seeing real return on investment, what they're doing is they've completely transformed their workflows in this manner. They are now very purposeful about saying, here is where we are using AI, and here is how we are using AI, and here is what the human interaction looks like.
What's the scale of change that's having? And you might not know this, and it might be early days yet, but are those organizations starting to look different, right? So yes, so once you change your workflow, that's then going to have an impact on the capability I need, the sort of roles, the organizational structure, the um, end to end, right? If you need to suit those workflows, those processes, has or any insights come out in terms of what some of those big headlines might be as to what is the future of organizations to adapt to these AI enabled workflows?
So you're right to say that we just don't know. It's such early days. What I will say is that if we think about one of the groups that I gave you, I spoke about how good AI is becoming at software development, right? Then there is already an impact being felt for software developers globally. So the demand for software developers is certainly been impacted. And a lot of this is kind of anecdotal, right? So there's some anecdotal stuff coming through from devs who are on various platforms for communicating to each other and talking about the shifts and the changes there. And this is where so I think there's some places where you're starting to feel that. I would think you take a lot of kind of roles that are administratively heavy, and where they're, if I think about areas like paralegals, or I think about those types, what you're finding is that if the AI is good enough to get to say 80% of the way that, the work that, previously a paralegal would do. So they clearly need some domain expertise. They clearly need to be well trained. If an AI is able to parse documents or is able to produce the kind of first drafts, if you like, and it's able to do it to the kind of 80% of that quality that would have previously taken a human to do, and then it goes to a more senior lawyer who then takes that and is then, which they would be doing anyway, right? That would be part of their workflow. They'd say paralegal does their work, it gets passed to it, and then they go through a drafting process and so on. The question is, if an AI can get in there and can do 50, 60, 70, 80% of that, I mean, for all of us, if you're putting proposals together, if you're doing, that's where we're seeing the real gains. If you're involved in design work, if you've got, then you're, right now we're already in a place where people are saying, I can use the large language models, and it can go a very, very long way to doing work that would have taken me, might have taken me half a day to do, and I could have something done in 5 minutes that's not going to get me all the way there, but it's such a great start. And so that's where we're expecting to see real productivity gains. The question would be, is that replacing somebody, or do you then say, well, that's wonderful, I've now got this skilled and experienced paralegal who isn't getting to do some of the work that they could do at a higher level, higher order work, where true human ingenuity and imagination is required. I need them to do more of that work, but they don't have time to do that because they're doing all of this other work. And that's the way I imagine it. I look at it and say that the thing that the machine will never be able to do, it doesn't have an imagination, and it doesn't understand meaning, and it doesn't understand context. And so much of that is just entirely essential to understanding how we work. So there's going to be some things it's going to be very good at, but you putting together a proposal, your client, your customer, and so you're going to think about it quite differently to the way the machine will.
Yeah. And in terms of HR, I guess you could replicate some of those examples that you gave to things like building out policies, building out procedures, building out some frameworks, etc., where AI could probably take quite a lot of that work. And then individuals that are typically sitting in those roles that would have taken 2 days or 3 days to, write up a policy or procedure for a particular area can now actually be elevated to be doing some really, much more meaningful work that's actually value adding and impactful rather than just this administrative, I guess, component and burden. And granted, it might not be at 100%, right? But no first draft of any policy would have been at 100% from a human anyway, right? So I think that there's definitely, some ties in there. I think one of the things that I'm definitely hearing from a lot of our customers in the work that we do, and certainly being involved a lot in the HR technology space, and then joining the HR space, and some components of HR obviously being around privacy, being around legislation, etc., is some of the ethical concerns around AI. It's definitely a key topic, as key as AI is. The one thing that most organizations and most HR professionals are thinking about, and business owners and business leaders, is the ethical concerns. What's some of your, I guess, take on some of those ethical concerns? There's obviously a number of them, but maybe just talk us through, I guess, your sort of view.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the interesting things we're finding is that where previously there was little demand for philosophers of ethics, they're now in high demand in companies like Google and so on, and getting very well paid for their work, because they're having to solve problems like, well, should this particular car have the option to run over three people here, or two people? What choice should it make, right? And what does a model landscape look like when you have a machine that's
It's
automated to make decisions, right?
real life trolley problem, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
right.
That's exactly what it
Fantastic.
is, and it's and it doesn't have a good answer.
No,
Is the reality,
well, there isn't one.
because there isn't one, and as you say, and so I think one of the areas that I've studied and I've been very interested in is areas like cognitive bias, and one of the things that is often said is that while much of the data that's historical, that machines are being trained on, has implicit bias that um, that is not obvious, right? And it could have been decades in the making, right? So whether that's the way that, let's take a difficult area like performance review, right, as an example. Um, think about how you might use AI in something like a performance review. If I had an AI and I said, I want you to take the individuals, I want you to look at their workload, I want you to take the KPIs that they're targeted against, I want you to see the success that the projects have been involved in the work, and here's all the measures that they're expected to meet. And I just want a purely data driven response to that, right? So, what can we say of their output? We can do some sentiment analysis and get a sense from the emails that they're receiving and responding to all of that. And I want the AI, and I'm going to get the AI to do it for all of the people within a department, right? And so it's entirely objective. So you look at it and you say, well, now there's no human making that decision. So are there advantages there? Well, the AI's got no reason to have favorites or to any other kind of human input that might skew this and might create some kind of bias. It should be unbiased. That would be the view, right? And I think that masks a much deeper problem, because on the surface that sounds like suddenly now we have something completely objective, completely fair. But of course, all you have to do, and this takes almost no thinking whatsoever, to say, all right, so the objective measure is this particular KPI, and did you meet it or did you not? But employee A has the most challenging, difficult project of all of the projects that the company's involved in, has the most demanding client who never seems to be pleased or happy with anything you do, even though they get twice the amount of resource thrown at them in comparison to everybody else doing similar level projects. And this one individual has been managing that and has managed to kind of skillfully guide their way through that for the entire year. But as a consequence of that, has perhaps not met some of the objective measures you might look at. Now, the only person that knows that is the manager, is the person who's involved in dealing with those projects. So we're now into a world of saying, how is a machine expected to get that context if it is not told that context? And so even something that looks like on the surface could be quite an easy win for AI. Oh, that'd be great. Now it's completely objective. No one can complain that, a manager's playing favorites in a performance review. Actually, what it masks is good managers, good leaders are working with their people on a day-to-day basis, understand the challenges that they face, understand the resource constraints that they have, and understand how well they're working to navigate that world. And do you as an employee want the machine to be making a decision on whether you get a bonus or whether you're considered for promotion, or do you want the manager who's seeing you day to day and understands the emotional and cultural context that you're in?
Strikes me that that example intersects with two of the themes that you already discussed as well, which is one, if we're looking at performance management and AI supporting in that, should we be changing our workflow around how we measure performance to utilize AI correctly, which might take a much broader view of performance, might be able to see how does the business succeed or fail based on the inputs of these people in ways that we might not have actually seen before or been able to quantify before, that we could change those criteria and those workflow. And then the ethical question as well, probably, of are we rewarding performance in the right way? Should we rethink how we do this now that we potentially have access to a bigger picture of how we can put this all together?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I might build on it by saying it's not difficult at all to reimagine how you would shift this, right? And take, so could the AI be recommending things to me, right? Now, I'll also imagine this. Imagine me as the employee. I get access to the same data that the AI does, but I then use the AI alongside what it's telling me. I can use the AI to generate my own narrative of my own personal growth and development across the year. I'm going to co-create a narrative with it based off the same data set. My manager is going to get both versions. It's going to get, here's what the AI's got to say. And what the manager can do is they can say, I'm going to develop my version, right? So I'm going to develop a narrative of how I think you performed this year, how I think you've grown as an individual, what I think the areas that you could sharpen up or you could improve in. Here's what I would like to see as the next kind of step in your development. You're both doing it, and then you're coming to the table to have a conversation that's based on that. And as an employee, I know the data that it's using, right? And I know that my manager's using the same data. So we're both starting from the same ground, and we both use it. Now those narratives are not going to look the same, but that's what the conversation is for, right? So now I've got AI in the loop in a process that starts to look, much more grounded, much more objective, but also recognizes the true value that a human brings to the table.
The thing that's striking me in everything that we've talked about so far is very much, I guess, a benchmark in my mind that is AI being used as an augmentation tool as opposed to being used as a replacement tool, which is where a lot of individuals are seeing potentially AI being, right? So I believe that just from the information I'm getting from customers and from conversations that I'm having, it appears very much that a lot of individuals are seeing AI as a totalistic thing, right? So it'll be binary. You'll be using AI, therefore humans won't be involved, or you'll be using humans, therefore AI won't be involved. And really, I think the way to approach this, it very much sounds, is to ensure that you're using it as an augmentation tool and making those philosophical and thoughtful ethical decisions about at what point are you actually allowing AI to intercept and at what point are you actually using that sort of 5 scale methodology of what components are you actually integrating into it. So is it a key decision that it's mathematical and therefore you do use AI to create an absolute, output, or is it that you ask it to potentially do a risk assessment, et cetera? And I think that possibly the one thing that I'm hearing coming out of this conversation is maybe some decision trees within organizations around the use of AI and some frameworks around that. Have you seen anything in organizations that are maybe already advanced in using AI that's maybe useful, that's working?
Nothing has been shared.
Nothing
And,
that's
and
been
I and I
shared.
think everyone's going to keep this very close to their chest. Is my guess. But I agree with that, and I would say that the this should be an iterative process, right? And it should be a process where companies are saying, well, let's see where we can use it and where there's natural fits. And there's a lot of companies that's what they're doing, right? So right now they're looking at areas and saying, okay, where could this be useful for us? And I think the first thing that they will run up against is places where people say, look, I wouldn't trust it. They have to have a human in. It's too significant. It's too consequential. We can't, we can't be using it in this environment just yet without human supervision. But that question is very opaque to people. They don't, when you say kind of human supervision and how are they working with AI, that starts to become quite difficult to say, well, what do we really mean by that? And everyone's looking for some certainty. And I think that's where this framework comes in, because you can say, here's exactly what we mean by this. And I think it's easy for most individuals, once it's explained in this format, you would say, I recognize this. We've got it at level 2, and this is how we're going to be using it. And then we'll trial it, we'll test it. Does it give us better outcomes or does it not? It may not. One thing I would like to say though is an area that's kind of close to my heart and my interest is you have to make a very clear distinction between what a machine is and what a human is. And unfortunately, this is colored by the fact that a lot of people's language, even from, biological systems and so on, people talk about the mind as a computer, right? We've got a kind of computational model and we talk about our brain having mechanisms, and we talk about having processes, and we talk about it as a system. And we use all this language that actually comes from the world of mechanics. It comes from the world of computing, and we apply it to humans. And we are absolutely not machines. We're nothing like machines. And even if you can say that there is a process, even at the kind of cellular level, and say, well, that looks like a mechanical process, it absolutely fundamentally is not, right? If you ask true biologists what's actually going on at the cell, they'll be able to tell you many things about its features and describe it, but they can't tell you how it's doing what it's doing. They've got no idea. In the same way that a physicist can't tell you what matter is, they've got no idea. That's just the true reality of it. And we get ourselves into a really worrying space if we start to conflate those two things. And I think you need really hard lines to distinguish them. And I want you to think about the idea of intelligence, right? Do we know what intelligence is? Because if we're creating an artificial intelligence that's supposed to be at human level, well, first you really ought to know what human level intelligence looks like. And that gets you into a really interesting area, one that from a cognitive science perspective, we call 4E cognition. And really by that, what we mean is that cognition is embodied. So you don't all of your intelligence doesn't come from the fact that you've got a brain. It comes from the fact that you engage with the world and that everything has a felt sense, right? Just the experience of you, everything that happens in your life. And if to put this into kind of concrete terms, being in a meeting room with all of your colleagues and your manager when something significant is about to take place, there's going to be a change to your structure, there's going to be something else. Think about how everybody feels in that environment and who's picking up signals from other people, and that's something that we just take for granted that is partner. That's cognition. We use that. Our thoughts are created from that. And to divorce ourselves from that aspect and not recognize that machine can't do that, you lose something hugely significant. And that's just the embodied piece. We'd also talk about it being enacted. We act on our environments. We change our environments. We use language to change our environment. We use language, we use actions, we use procedures in the world, and we change our environments. A machine doesn't change its environment, and it can't change its environment, right? It follows instructions that we give it. It doesn't know what to do unless we give it instructions. Even if you give it a task and say, come back with 5 or 6 recommendations, it might go off and do that, but it can't do anything unless it's told. So we have this enacted cognition that's really important. We're also embedded in our environment, and so we're taking in all this sense data that the machine is not. And then finally, we talk about our cognition being extended, and that is we use tools. We've got these are our devices, or everything from a calculator to a pen to all of these incredible inventions have created. They actually extend out our cognition beyond us as humans and what we're capable of. Now, that's a kind of very short and quick detour into a huge body of research that just gives you a sense of saying, do you think you really know what intelligence is? And do you think that we're really creating a machine that's going to be capable of all of that? I think that what we'll do is produce machines that are very good at mimicking what it sounds like, what it perhaps, and it is able to communicate with us in ways that will feel like it's a human level intelligence. But you must be very careful to not mistake that for the real thing. And what is the cash value of that? The cash value is a human will understand the culture in your organization in a way that a machine never will.
Yeah.
And if you've ever gone from one organization to another, what immediately happens is you go from one organization to another and you say, I can't believe they do things like this. I can't believe the culture here compared to where I was before. Here, the culture was this thing, and here, the culture is this thing. And it's immediately obvious to you, right? And whenever I ask this question, if I'm in sessions and I've got groups of leaders together and I ask that question, say, what was it like to go from this culture to that, even internally in the organization? Yeah, I used to work over here and then I moved to that part of the organization. Totally different, entirely different structures. What was, and what did they mean? The cultural norms, what was acceptable, what the right behaviors were, how you conducted yourself, how you spoke to other people, all of that we learn really quickly. We get assimilated super fast. And
Yeah.
that's because we're highly intelligent individuals that use cognition across all of these four different levels. And that just quite frankly is never what a machine will be able to do. So my kind of wider advice to organizations is don't lose sight of that.
I think
Yeah.
one of the things that really speaks to as well is we often focus on the technology as well, what are the barriers to the technology evolving? What are the, technical hurdles we have to overcome? But really, when we look at what's coming in this revolution, it's it's actually about the people and the acceptance and the skills and that how do we create the extension of that cognition? Printing press didn't really do anything, but it enabled a whole generation of people to start learning to read, and it was that learning to read that was actually the advancement in human understanding, and AI is going to play a similar role. So understanding how that's going to play out and how organizations can prepare for that is probably at least as important as understanding the technology itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts, Darren, just regarding, I guess, for organizations now wanting to move into this space, right, and wanting to adopt some AI usage? We've obviously talked a little bit about frameworks. We've talked a little bit about the ethical, I guess, challenges. But do you have any sort of practical strategies for organizations around how they maybe innovate with AI? So what are the key sort of practical things that they might be wanting to do or look at?
Yeah, and so wouldn't shock you to hear that. I would say, um, first off, you need to have a policy, you need to have an approach that's thought through, and so that I think that there should be a structure in place before you start going into different parts of the organization and running multiple kind of projects to see where it works and where it doesn't. I think you first need to take a step back and say, what is my positional statement here? Right? How do we feel about AI and the potential of AI and its use in our organization, and what are our principles going to be, right? And we'll spend a lot of time in organizations talking about their values. I would like to say, how does AI fit into your values, right? Where is that? There's an obvious crossover point for me there that I think that's where the conversation has to start, and a true recognition of what it is and what it isn't, um, and really using that as a way to say to the people in your organization that look, this is how we intend to use it, but we're going to be thoughtful about this, right? It's not just going to be forced into areas without us really considering how this might impact us as a company. So that would be the first step, and then I think from there a natural place would be to say, my temptation would be rather than to centralize this, to push it out. I'd be looking for individuals across the organization in every single area. So I want people in marketing, I want people in the operations, I want, wherever you happen to be in the organization, who are the people that would put their hand up and say, I can really see just from my initial, just from using it, maybe I use an LLM every day. I'm already seeing the places that this could really play out. I want those individuals to be the ones. What are the ideas? How should we be thinking about it? Take those, bring them in, and centralize around the point of this framework and say, here's how we're going to think about how we're using it. Because what you should end up with is a range of projects that you should be able to say, okay, we've got 5 projects over here that I think are great candidates for full automation. And I've got, 3 or 4 projects over here that are absolutely going to be, if we had the AI recommending options for us, I think it could do that. It's got, and here's the kind of data that it's going to require. And so before you get into, are we going to actually build anything? The kind of the highest level of, should you be taking a version of an LLM and training it on the organization's data? In other words, Does it get access to all of your email? Does it get access to all of your documents? I would say most companies will be quite concerned about that at this point in time. And until people feel that there's real, I think until people feel that they can see the security aspect of that is tied down, I don't think they'll do it. But there will be, this is why perhaps having, if I think about innovation projects, we tend to say in the world of innovation, you say you would be much better having 100 projects running at a small level, and those that prove they've got some traction then get access to a little bit more funding, and so on, so on, so on, rather than saying, here are the 3 big initiatives that we're going to fund this year. And I think AI has to go the same way. But crucially, we set off our values, we understand how it connects to our purpose and to who we are as an organization. Then we go all the way out to to all of the departments and individuals at every piece of organization. They come back to somewhere central where you can manage it and how it fits into the framework. And then you can start to think about projects that are going to redesign your workflows and test and iterate. And it's like any other innovation project from there.
Yeah, perfect. Really appreciate all of those insights and appreciate your time today. Before we close the episode, I have a final question for you. Do you have any predictions around the next wave of AI and maybe, the next big thing that you think AI is going to, I guess sort of make waves in?
Yeah, I think it connects back to um, the ability of natural language development of products and solutions. I think that's really where it's going to be, and there will be some success stories with companies being able to build what are customer facing, either products or services that have been generated almost entirely from an AI. And I think there'll be some wins there, but I think there'll be an awful lot of losses. There's going to be far more failures than there will be successes, but that's natural in any new innovation cycle. But yeah, I think that's the place where we're really going to see it first, because there's so much money being funneled into it, and it's really the stock market in the last couple of years has really been almost entirely dependent on this as the potential for future growth. And so pretty soon it's going to have to start demonstrating that it can pay for itself. Because one thing to recognize is that the place that's particularly scary is the projected energy demands in order to run the compute, in order to do what we hope the AIs are going to be able to do, is staggering and is way beyond what, if you take country like the US, even with all of the major investments it's talking about making, the energy demand is going to be 5 times what they're what they say they're going to build in the next 10 years. So it's not clear at all where the energy power is going to be to fund this. But down at the level of the organizations, I think you're going to see some amazing applications, some amazing new products and services that are going to be AI generated that will be winners.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and really appreciate your insights.
That's all right. Probably worth reminding listeners as well, if they have any questions or comments or any feedback they'd like to give us, they can send us an email at.
The info at the hrtechbench.com.au.
I think it'd be great as well if you have any links or documentation on some of that research. I think this episode in particular, we covered a really practical and useful model for people to think about. We'd probably like to make that available to listeners as well.
Happy to do that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both.